Flash Ops into a Flash ban, and we get the return of some top-tier teams in the Overwatch League. All that and more this week on the Control Point. Welcome back, everybody, to the Control Point. It's Possible, Kenobi, and LaFawn once again. This week, we're going to start off by discussing how Echo showed up in her first week live and the Flash Ops tournament that she was welcome to Overwatch with. After that, we'll review some of the best games from this rather spicy week of the Overwatch League, and then preview the best upcoming matches in Week 12. First off, though, let's pull it back. Let's talk about Echo, and more specifically, the Flash Ops tournament that was just held this past weekend, Kenobi.
Yeah, it was actually a really fun tournament, I think, to watch for all the spectators. We got to see, if you guys weren't aware, this was a tournament that was put on, and every team had to play Echo, so we saw her quite a bit in this weekend's tournament and kind of where she would fit into certain aspects of the meta, and I think it was really fun to see that character. I know LaFawn, we've played a lot of games in ranked together. He has 100% win rate on Echo, and I think he thinks that that character is incredibly fun. I think so as well in terms of also casting the game. She offers a lot of cool niche things that in like little intricacies between who she duplicates and things like that. So I think she's a really fun character. If you don't know, the winner of that matchup, at least in NA, was the Test Team 1, which was consisting of Clone, Manhar, Blue Jake, Dante, Avast Friend, and Red Shell. I think she's incredibly fun. I think she's going to be really reinvigorating for the game. As we'll get to in a little bit, unfortunately, she won't be available for next week.
Well, but let's talk about Echoes first specifically. You said she's a lot of fun, but she's also pretty crazy strong here, LaFawn.
She is. I'm still hesitant to say that she's overpowered or anything like that. I don't think she is yet. We saw her in a single tournament in which she had a 100% pick rate mandated by the tournament rules. So, it's always tough to draw conclusions from that. If you can't switch and bring other counters into play, it's tough to really say where she stands. But I thought at least she was strong and entertaining. That being said, the highs of Echo were very high. The lows were often invisible. So I'm curious to see how she evolves as time goes on because, hey, we're not going to see her in week one, although we weren't going to see her in week one anyway, right? So I think we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to get a taste of what Echo truly means to the competitive side of the game. But on the other hand, it was at least entertaining to see such a high mobility character be a mainstay for a long period of time.
Well, and you've both mentioned it now. Let's dive in more specifically to arguably the bigger news coming out of Echo for this upcoming week. She has been banned. She's not going to be seeing play in professional, which admittedly she wasn't anyways. She wasn't going to be available to the Overwatch League this weekend regardless. But competitive and pro play now share a hero pool, so you don't get to play her in ranked either until next Monday.
Yeah, this is a rough place to be for me because as Kenobi said, I have 100% win rate on Echo across a pretty large swath of games. It's not like one or two. I think it's like 6 or 7 or something like that. So a pretty large amount. But I think this is a case where this is one of the side effects of ranked being the dictator for the bans at this point. Well, the high end of ranked anyway. With a new character, you're always going to get that character seeing a ton of playtime, which then spikes them up the charts. You're going to have that character removed. It is unfortunate. Jeff Kaplan actually had a recent post on the developer forums about sort of the thought process behind bans that come into play. It's a tough place to be. I could totally see where the developers are coming from. It sucks though. I would have liked to see Echo play a little bit longer.
I mean, the silver lining for LaFawn, though, is you keep your 100% win rate for the next week. So.
I could easily not pick Echo, right? Like, that's not... not Echo being available has nothing to do with that.
But now you get 2 full weeks of 100% win rate on that pick specifically. Let's move on, though, to a team that no longer has 100% win rates gracing them, and honestly has been met with some kind of contention this week. The Vancouver Titans seem to be boiling over under the lid right now. It's not entirely sure what's happening, but Kenobi, it's not looking good.
Yeah, a lot of the players, if you're unaware, have removed their kind of branding off of their socials in regards to, I believe it's like Hawksall Slime. Janu has done it as well, I think. A lot of them have removed the Vancouver Titans branding from entirely their Twitter profiles and all of their socials, which does not bode well. I would say Ryu Jae-hong also didn't have his, but he never had his, just to clarify that. But for the rest of the Titans, this is kind of a we're just seeing them. I think at this point, we obviously don't know what's happening on behind the scenes, but it does not look good at this moment. And it's kind of sad for a team that we thought was like going to stick together through everything. I mean, old Runaway used to do that. And I really wonder like how much credit should we give to like Flowervin and Runner for keeping this group like as close knit as they were? Because they didn't have last year. Maybe they had that because they had Flowervin kind of there at the start, and also Harsha I think was there, who also probably played a big part. But like now with the coaching staff, with that team getting rid of Bumper, I think they are slowly devolving. And unfortunately, this is kind of what it goes from when you're this scrappy team in tier 2 who's like seen as like a family to a more corporate league like Overwatch League. Stuff like this is going to happen, and those families don't really exist anymore, I don't think, in the Overwatch League.
Well, as long as we avoid a divorce, I think the Vancouver Titans would prefer that. But let's move on to reviewing this last weekend of matches, because like I said earlier, there were some pretty dang good matches this weekend. Let's start off with the Battle for LA, LaFawn. It was a 5-map burner, but maybe only because there was a tilt factor involved.
I have never seen a team win get so salty before.
So mad, dude.
Like completely out of the pale, really. I mean, just on his comp, we saw rants on Twitter.
We saw
the only person
middle finger emojis. Like what? Like
I think the only person from the Gladiators that was even somewhat approaching a mature outlook was the coach. And you know what? I love it. I'm not gonna comment on the Gladiators being salty in a negative sense. I think it's hilarious, right? We always wanted these storylines, and I think the way it was approached was perfectly fine. The player's the one being salty. They're fighting it out with each other. That's cool. The coach is the voice of reason at the end of the day, and that's good too. You need to have sort of that balancing aspect. So, I think a lot of people would have when they would have expected me to say, "Oh, they're just being sore losers or whatever," although they won. I think it's hilarious. I'm here for it.
Well, and let's talk about why they got salty. It was the composition run by the Valiant that pushed them to the brink here. There were more than a few memes about how the Gladiators were going to Twitter, no, you can't make it an 8v6 with Ash and Torb, and then the classic Robo go memes on social media here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, the comp, it just seemed like it was because, like, I mean, let's be honest that, like, in this last meta, or this last pack of hero pools, it was McCree and Widowmaker who were gone. I don't think if those characters are still around in hero pools, that this composition gets played at all, but I think this is more KSP is, like, comfort. This is a comfort pick. Like, he is known for his Ashe, he's known for hit scan roll, and realistically, like, if you're trying to deal against something like a Pharah, or you just want hit scan in general in your composition, at this point, like, Soldier's not really that great, so you have to get something that's the next best, really the next best option. That is going to be Ashe. And I think the composition, like, we did see it a little bit. Also, Chengdu played some more Ashe as well. And I think it does have value on certain maps, but I think more so the Gladiators were like, realistically, the Gladiators were probably upset because they should have probably put them away like sooner than they did. Like, this shouldn't have really, they were probably didn't want this to go to a map 5. They wanted it to be over because I believe it was a 2-0, and then the Valiant won the last 2 maps, and they were probably just like, we shouldn't be here. Like, we need, like, we wanted the clean 3-0, and then they had to play like 5 maps. Like, that's got to be probably where a lot of the tilt factor comes from.
They stave off the reverse sweep at the very least. The battle for LA does not end yet again with the Valiant getting a reverse sweep. Let's move on, though, to a bit of a puzzler for this weekend. Florida Mayhem versus Paris Eternal. I don't even think we touched on this game last week because we really didn't expect Florida to show up at all, but it was actually Paris who were nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, Paris did not load into the server at all. I mean, this was just I think it's a complete misread on what the meta was. Like, a lot of teams were playing Mei still. Nico was like playing like Pharah and stuff like this, like really odd compositions that I think, like, when you have someone like Nico who's like has those moments on Doomfist where he can play Doomfist fine, or he's on Mei, like things like that, like, why are we not going more towards that type of composition? And I think it's just a hard misread from Paris on what they want to play. And Florida, to their credit, took advantage of that, really stomped them. I mean, it was not close. This is like, there's that meme about close 3-0s. This wasn't close. This was a complete stomp by Florida. Paris, I think, had just a really bad read on the meta.
Well, and is this an underlying problem we're going to see with Paris LaFawn, or is this kind of all right, hero pools, everybody gets their 1 week of mess reading the meta kind of thing?
I mean, there was FD got on his stream after the match, made a couple of comments about the games that his team had played the last week, and he said the Philly game hurt them the most. The 3-2 loss there hurt them the most,
Sure.
which I agree with that. I agree with that because it was very close. It was 1 or 2 fights away from flipping the series into their favor. I think he then went on to say that he didn't really feel bad about or he did not really feel that they were in the game versus Florida. He felt
Sure.
that they misread practice. They misread the team. Florida, of course, they misread the mayhem, and as a result, they just weren't there to show up. So I think this is just one of those games where put it out of your memory, especially with how Paris has performed at the beginning of the season. You put this one out of your memory, you move on, you pretend it didn't happen, you try not to let it happen again. And I think we can give them, because of how good they've been in the last couple of weeks, especially against the teams they've played. I think we can put this as Mayhem getting better, because I think they did, and that Paris, this is just their one match that they can sort of put on the marker and say, yeah, that's the one we let go, and move on from that.
Blink twice, shake your head, and then shake it off. Move forward. That's what we're going to do right now as we move on to the continent of Asia. Let's talk about some of the Pacific East Division games that were played. Kenobi, you were always the China guy. What was interesting this weekend coming out of that section?
I mean, so when we talked about it earlier, we talked about, like last week when we talked about it, we said that, like, okay, so we're looking mostly at the games between Chengdu and Hangzhou and Shanghai and Chengdu, because we thought that obviously, and we were kind of right, that the Guangzhou Charge versus Hangzhou Spark match that didn't really do anything. It was just a mess of a game. Guangzhou really just kind of stomped Hangzhou a lot in that matchup, and I think what we've seen now is, I would say that Shanghai is far and away the best Asian or Chinese team, and I don't even think it's close at this point. I think they're just so much better. Jinmu tried his best in that matchup against Shanghai, against Ding, and he hit some really nutty Ferris shots, but it's just not enough. Leave kind of inconsistent a little bit in that matchup, but I think in general, Chengdu, after their matchup against Hangzhou, Guangzhou rather, I think they have kind of cemented themselves as the second best team, at least in China, which is kind of weird to say, because I think going into the season, a lot of people didn't think that was going to be the case. And now with all of these other teams coming, Volmel actually made a good point that with all the rest of these other teams coming into the region, they're going to get stronger, because you don't have to scrim against the same people anymore, right? You can play against like New York NYXL, for instance, who we were talking about later. They're not going to be scrimming against Chengdu. They're going to have a hard time if Chengdu brings out some of these wacky compositions. So I think Chengdu is in a really good spot right now.
Anything to add, Lafon?
On the whole, I agree. I think Jinmu actually was the better Pharah in that match versus Shanghai. I know that's a little bit controversial to the eye test, but overall, I think he performed better. The one thing I have to say is that Chengdu could be the best team in China, except for one small problem: their tank line is way too inconsistent. And in Overwatch, you live and die by the tanks, and in Chengdu's case, they did die, in fact, against the Shanghai Dragons. So, on the whole, fully agree with Kenobi, and I'm actually really excited to see in the upcoming weeks and matches where Chengdu kind of falls into place.
Let's move on to the Fuel versus the San Francisco Shock, because this was more of a match that we expected could be kind of a burner, kind of a good one, and oh man, did it deliver. Undoubtedly, the most competitive high-tier match of this week in the Overwatch League. Both teams really playing tooth and nail for this one. Ultimately, the Fuel come out on top. They take that I believe so, right?
No, the Shock.
No, the Shock won. Oh, but the Fuel made it close.
They did make it close. It was 5-0.
You know what? I consider that a win. That's a win for them, considering how Fuel has been in the past. The Shock do hold on to it though. That's what actually happens. Yeah. But Kenobi, you still had some concerns for the Shock.
Yeah, I think the Shock. So when we talked about it last week, again, we said that if Dallas Fuel makes it close, it's a win for them, and it's kind of a quote unquote loss for the Shock, because realistically, if you were to look at this game on paper, if everyone's full strength, I would still expect that Shock would easily handle Dallas. Just across the board, I think the Shock are the better team, but there's still no Sinatra, which to me is really weird, especially because Rascal is playing things like the Mei, things like the Doomfist, which are heroes that Sinatra, he can play those, especially Doom. Last season, I mean, Shock have a championship skin that is Doomfist because of how well Sinatra was playing on that character in the playoffs. So I'm still concerned about where he is and why he's not playing. There's, maybe we'll see him this weekend or something, but I would like to see him more definitely in that composition, because I think if he's there, I think these games look probably a lot less close, but full credit to Dallas. They did make it as close as it was. It was like a couple of fights, I think, that could have gone their way and they would have taken the series. But for Shock, I'm a little bit worried about them.
Well, let's talk about Fuel, though, because although they didn't take the match, this is kind of the Fuel that a lot of people have been talking up for years, and it's never happened in years, and it's never happened again. LaFawn, guys like Decay, Doha, they are finally bringing this org above the middle tier in the Overwatch League.
I mean, this could be the point where I say I told you so, that this was going to be a good match. I was one of the few people that was saying, listen, it should be an interesting match to watch. But I'm actually going to do the opposite. I'm going to say this match was not what the field wanted. I think that their 3-2 loss was actually not a good thing for them in their eyes. And the reason for that is because they let themselves get rattled against a team that I think they should have beaten. I think the San Francisco Shock won 2 key maps in a very key fashion, and that's what the difference in the series was. And yes, we could talk about the Fuel being better because they are, they proved it in the match. But I think the most important thing is, for me, how do they build on this, right? The fact that they lost Hanamura that badly is a disaster. And the fact that they didn't even show up on Control, on the second Control on Busan, where they let Shock's mental reset, their, Shocker championship roster, they've been there, done that. The Dallas Fuel are just starting to build towards that point. I want to see how the Fuel evolve from this, because I think that is a bigger difference maker here. So yeah, credit to the Fuel for showing up. I think that Decay and Doha are fantastic. I don't need to sing their praises anymore. Yeah. Their gameplay does it for them. This is a case now, how do the Fuel evolve? Because it's good to play one match really well, but it's how do you string those together? And you need to eventually start taking wins.
And I think just one thing before we start, the one person who I also, or not one person, but the 2 people that actually on Dallas who I think have really improved going forward is the tank line, because No and Gamsu, at least in that matchup, No had a not phenomenal, because phenomenal is what I reserve for really good, but he had a pretty decent Sigma game, and he's usually the person that when we talk about this roster, he's the weak spot, right? And he looked pretty decent. Gamsu is looking like just a solid main tank role right now. So I think that is also, if we're going to sing the praises of Doha and Decay, I think we can start now singing the praises of that tank line, because they're getting slowly better as well for Dallas.
Note finally returning to form, used to be one of the best off tanks in the Overwatch League, or at least considered to be so. We'll have to see if him and the rest of the Fuel can keep that form, though, as we move on to next week. First, previewing week 12 of the Overwatch League, let's talk about the hero pools. The removed characters for the DPS, it's Echo, like we said earlier, Tracer, and then the tank is Orisa, and the support is Moira. So all in all, if we're talking about Overwatch League specifically, considering that Echo was never going to be played, this isn't a bad hero pool. I would have liked to see Tracer. I always like to see Tracer. But Orisa and Moira both gone. I think a lot of people are going to be happy about that.
I think with this hero pool, or with this hero pool specifically, especially with Tracer not being there, I think Rhine meta is going to return a little bit more, because Orisa, I think you can play Rhine Sigma, Rhine Diva. I think that's going to return. I think Rhine at this point is one of the most fun tanks to watch in all of Overwatch. And with Moira not being there as well, I think offers a little bit more. You can run the Lucio kind of Ana, which people were running before Overwatch had hero pools. So I think that, and I really like that composition actually with the McCree and the May. I thought that was really fun. So I think that's where the meta would probably trend, because of the Tracer ban as well. And that's actually what I'm really excited for, because I really thought that was kind of where a lot of the good games that we had, that's where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. LaFawn, anything to add to that? I actually no. I think this is going to be, this is going to be the one point I'm going to make. I'm interested in how the mobile teams end up playing, because Dive is a question mark, especially with the fact that May is still on the menu.
Yeah, May, Tor. We're not seeing a lot of Dive this year. When people talked about 222 returning, people talked about hero pools entering, everyone was like, oh, maybe we'll see Dive when things have been. We haven't seen much Dive. But what we are going to see this weekend is the return of 2 promising teams in the Overwatch League. One from each division. We got the Seoul Dynasty coming back, and the New York Excelsior. They're both they're in Korea now, so they're going to be playing against these Chinese teams, and we're going to see how those teams match up against the rest of the league.
I think just talking about how we're going to start this, the best map that we're going to see specifically this next weekend is going to be map. The best match that we're going to see is definitely going to be Seoul versus Shanghai. I think that is going to be the match that determines the best team in Asia. And that, like, just from top to bottom, if you look at just the matchups in that, like Gesture versus Stand One, insanely like awesome matchup. The DPS, like Profits versus DM or whatever combination of the DPS the Shanghai want to bring out with like Fleta or Ding and things like that. I think this is like the marquee matchup that decides like where exactly Seoul is in terms of power ranking, because they've only played 2 games, right? We haven't seen a lot of them because they've had to move to Korea or move back to Korea, I guess it was, because they were in LA. But I think with Shanghai, this is really their test to see, like, are they one of these teams that is going to be considered one of the best teams in the league? You have to play close against Seoul. I would expect actually Seoul to win this game because I think Profits is actually just that nuts of a DPS duo, and this is going to be a point where I think it's going to matter a lot, especially with these hero pools. So that's my prediction. But this is the one, if you have to watch a game this weekend, watch this one. Like, this is the one that I think everyone should watch.
And I think the other game you should...
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think the other game you should watch this week. Yeah, I think the only other game that you really absolutely must watch this week is New York Excelsior versus Chengdu Hunters. I think these 2 matches together are going to tell a lot about the league very quickly. So for my money, if you have only time to watch 2, these are the 2 you should be watching.
Yep.
But they're not the only 2 of relevance here. There's some other pretty good matches, as we're going to move on and talk about the Atlanta Reign rematch versus the Philadelphia Fusion. Now, last time, Philly just barely avoided getting reverse swept by the Atlanta Reign for their 10-map weekend, where they also played Paris to 5 maps that weekend. I believe reverse swept them. So Philadelphia, they're going to come back into this. If it's not a close match, I will wear a sock on my head next show.
I'll clip that. Someone clip that.
Nobody clip that. Nobody clip that. But Kenobi, for real, this should still be an absolute banger.
I think it's going to be very close in terms of how these 2 teams are going to match up against each other. Like we said, like this is when we talked about this game beforehand, we thought that this is going to be kind of like the litmus test for both of these teams in terms of where they are in the division, like which team is really better in terms of Philly and Atlanta. I think this is the 3rd time they've played each other, if I'm not mistaken, or was last week the first time? Okay,
second
so
time. This is
second
the second time.
So this is the second time. Okay, I don't know why I thought that, but it feels like every team, at least in China, has like played each other 3 different times. So this is like the limit.
Keep going.
But we do see Atlanta coming in. They almost got the reverse sweep because I think was this the one where...
Nope, they almost got the reverse sweep.
They almost got the reverse sweep.
You can do it, Kenobi. I believe in you.
Yeah, I got it. But I think with Atlanta, I really want to see more of how Baby Day is going to play because I think they're going to put him back in the lineup because this is a McCree centric meta. Because I think like whenever McCree is available, he's going to be able to be played. Yeah. So I want to see, are they going to continue to play Baby Bay in that position where he's going to have to hard carry on a role like that McCree? Because he's going up against Carpe or he's going up against Hisu, depending on which one they want to put on the McCree. And those are 2 battles that are incredibly difficult for him. So I wonder if they like decide to put Edison on that role instead. That's what I'm going to be looking out for. Where does Baby Bay slot in this week in Atlanta? Because it seems like they're favoring him a lot when in like a lot of these hit scan roles and hit scan matchups.
Well, and LaFon, let's talk about Philadelphia here because there is an elephant. I'm not sure it's in the room, but an elephant on the bench that we have to discuss. Chipsa on one of his streams said that if he doesn't play the next game for Philadelphia Fusion, he'll gift 1 million subs to XQC. That's got to be completely honest, totally valid. We're seeing Chipsa this weekend, right?
Maybe. Dude, it could be anything when it comes to Chipsa. So shrug and move on. I think it's the best way to describe that.
All right, well, can do, LaFon. Let's move on to the Battle of Texas then, because that is going to be the match that rounds out next weekend entirely. The very last match next Sunday. We got the Dallas Fuel versus the Houston Outlaws. This is generally a pretty fun match, but Kenobi, I think we'd be lying to ourselves if we didn't have an expected favorite.
Yeah, should be Dallas like easily handling this, especially the way they played the Shock last weekend. I think this is like just a pretty much an open and shut case that I think unless like Houston brings something out that's different, like when they have this like Ryan composition, I think they're the team that probably doesn't want to play Ryan the most. Like I think they have a much better what's the word? They have a much better style when they play around the Orisa and the Sigma. I think those type of compositions when Muma doesn't have to play Reinhardt, where I think for the other team, for Dallas, they look fine playing Reinhardt. Gamsu has been really solid so far on the Rhine. Remember that shatter that we saw on Eichenwald, 6-man out of spawn, like that type of stuff. I think he's been really phenomenal so far on his Reinhardt. So I think based on that, and also just the DPS matchup where it's Doha and Decay, I think they're just insanely good. I wonder, does Houston start to move back towards like Hackfist, because that would be putting Blase and Dante on both of their best heroes? That could be something that we see. I'm not sure if they want to play that or if they're scrimming that or anything like that, but that would be, I think, one of the avenues I would see is if they play Hackfist. I think Dallas would have, or Houston rather, would have a much better chance of beating Dallas. But I think if it's playing like standard comp, I think definitely it's going to be Dallas who has the advantage. You
agree with that, LaFawn? Do you think that Houston should just kind of lean into their favorite heroes and not really conform to quote unquote meta? That's been a debate about Houston for a very long time, actually. Do you think that'll help them out this weekend?
I think in hero pools, that's what you have to do anyway. That's what Dallas is doing. That's what Dallas did, and it worked out. So I think in general, that's an idea that most teams should be doing to begin with.
Well, then that's going to round out the preview, review, and news sections of our show. We're going to head into overtime now. So anyone first time watching the control point, basically the way this works is I'm just going to rapid fire questions at these two funny hits, weird hits, sad hits of tiny or minor topics throughout the past week of Overwatch, and they only get one or two sentences to actually answer and discuss this topic. After that, we're going to round out the show, but make sure you stick around if you are watching live on Twitch, because we do have the Q&A laid back post show. But now let's get into overtime. LaFawn, first up, Blizzard banned over 5,000 cheaters this weekend, including 100 of the top 500 in Korean solo queue.
Goodbye and good riddance. That's all I have to say.
Oh, fair enough. Kenobi, Papa Jeff Kaplan actually went to the forums and dunked on somebody who claimed they weren't cheating, just taking him to town, honestly.
Dude, I really love that post. He's just like, goodbye. Like, we've noticed that you've had these. Just get out of here, dude. Like, kind of like what LaFawn said. Papa Jeff shares those sentiments. Goodbye to all those cheaters. We don't need you in our game anymore.
All right, LaFawn, in the Boston-Toronto match, we didn't talk about it today, but we have to bring up that first fight on Ilios. It took nearly 2 full minutes.
By the end of it, I was hoping the series was over. So that's all. Like, I mean, it's Boston versus Toronto. It's how does Boston manage to keep getting El Clasicos, dude? I don't get it. I really don't.
Well, maybe it has something to do with their strength as a roster, but we're going to move on. Kenobi, there's been some really stupid people on Reddit criticizing Fran for quote-unquote getting carried on her team. What kind of nonsense is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just utter nonsense. I mean, if you're one of those people, like, just get out of our esport, dude. We don't need you to be criticizing Fran for anything like that. We don't need that type of talk. Fran, from what I saw, I casted one of their games, played pretty well, and they won the game that they were on playing that Baptiste, played really well on Baptiste as well. So I don't know what these comments are about getting carried or whatever. Just if you're doing that, get out. Just I mean,
they won the tournament. You can.
Yeah, we don't want you here.
Get out. But speaking of getting out of our esport, on a more somber note, LaFawn, Clockwork Vendetta, the infamous and famous team over in EU, for once upon a time taking it to GOATs with their unique composition, has fully disbanded.
It was a long time coming, unfortunately, for Clockwork Vendetta. When you lose that many players that quickly, and especially with the sort of identity that Clockwork Vendetta had, it's tough to replace players in that same style. So the writing was on the wall. You hate to say it, but it was true. And for Clockwork Vendetta, we celebrate what they did and thank them for all the games that we got to see.
Well, we're also going to be keeping that motif as we move on to our next topic. Kenobi, Swimmer has retired from competitive play in Overwatch. A long-standing member in the Tier 2 scene finally gets to the Boston Uprising, and then for his own health reasons, for his own mental health, has to step back himself.
Yeah, I mean, you understand that. It was a really nice message that he put on Twitter for his retirement, and he kind of embodies what, like, I guess the path to pro was, where it was this player who a lot of people thought should, like, he grinded Tier 2 out. One of the players who was in there for the longest and for Tier 3 eventually got up to the Boston Uprising this year and realized the path to pro from Open Division all the way to Overwatch League, and credit to where credit is due. He managed to do it, and few people can say that. So for him going forward, wish him all the best, and maybe we'll see him again soon.
Definitely celebrating what he accomplished. LaFawn, last one. The Echo Contenders skin was available for purchase right when Echo went live over in EU, but it was a glitch. It was a psych. They removed it. And now I'm just left here sad.
Let me buy the contender skins.
Yes.
Let me buy the World Cup skins. Please let me celebrate these teams. That's all I want. I want to be able to buy them and celebrate the big game. I guess I could buy the Houston Outlaw skin. It's close enough.
Close enough in skill level too, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't say
All
it.
right, on that note, we're going to throw
Okay.
out on that note, we're going to throw out for this week of the Control Point. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, make sure you follow here on Twitch. Subscribe even if you're got some money to spend. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you follow ELHL Esports there as well. We're going to be back next week discussing the evolution of the online matches in week 13 of the Overwatch League. If you are watching live on Twitch, make sure you stick around for the Q&A post show. We slow things down, talk with the chat about whatever is coming into anybody's head, and all things Overwatch. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that next week you tune in. We're live every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern. But until next Monday, it's been Possible Kenobi and LaFawn. We'll see you next week on the Control Point.